the corner, or what you need to do, and then we'll carry on and take questions at the end. When you set up.
I'm ready to go, ready to fight.
Okay, not with me, I hope. It's my particular pleasure and privilege to introduce Owen to you this afternoon. I think he's known to many of you, but for those to whom he is not known, Alderman Owen Kinahan has had a long relationship with both the city and this university. He was an alumni officer at UCT, after which he ran his own public relations company. This was followed by a stint as the director of the Josephine Mill Museum before he was elected to local government. He was a city councillor for 15 years before being appointed as special advisor to the Speaker at the city for governance and special projects. He served on 3 consecutive councils at UCT and as chair of the university's Building and Development Committee. He is currently writing a book on memorialization in Cape Town, which is the topic of this afternoon's lecture. So please welcome Owen.
Thank you very much, everybody. There is a lot of material to go through this afternoon, but it is literally the tip of the iceberg. I've been working with this for about 18 months now, and it's threatening to be as long as the original war. But I'm trying to, every time you open a door, there's another 3 doors behind it that you need to have a look at. Thank you. Is this just the forward and the, okay. The working title is Cape Town Remembers World War I, to try and keep the focus. And it is literally, what was Cape Town like at the time of the First World War? What did the war do to Cape Town? And how long did the war last? Because it didn't finish on the 11th of November 1918. You know, the simple bit is that the peace, and then everybody came home, or some people came home, and then memorialization started, which is a large chunk of this. But for generations of people, the widows, the orphans, that war dragged on. And one can say probably that it actually hasn't finished, so we continue to remember it. If I might just say a word too about the inspiration and the initiative for doing this was as the centenary of the First World War came up, and there was the most fabulous stuff happening, particularly in the United Kingdom, with really imaginative programs, really good heritage stuff, and it was an absolute celebration. And who can ever forget the poppies in the tower? Who can ever forget the endless concerts, the dignified ceremonies that happened throughout? And we waited in South Africa. Absolutely nothing. No initiative from the state whatsoever. Whatever did happen, happened because individuals, particularly those interested in military history and those who were active in the military, took it into their own hands. And I want to pay tribute to people here this afternoon, like Kevin Ashton and Mac Bissett and many others, who are the backbone of the continuation of remembering those who have given their lives for our country and for civilization in general. So nothing happened, but we'll get to that sordid tale in a moment. If I can, here we go. Right, who does one dedicate this book to? And I was determined that this wasn't going to be about heroes. The title's taken in any case, not about heroes. And I drew on some of my own ancestors as ordinary people, as most of the people involved with the war were ordinary people. And I'm just going to say a few words about a few of them here. On the right of the screen there are my paternal my patrilineal maternal great-grandparents, rejoicing in the names of Ezekiel and Mary Ann Seal. This extraordinary thing where they died in 1917, a week apart. And I thought, you know, at that age, in the middle of this horrendous war, what is to their background? Until I started to delve and think a little bit. For 60 years of their married life, the United Kingdom had been at war in 30 major conflicts on every single continent, ranging from the Xhosa Wars on our eastern frontier, the Anglo-Zulu War, the Boer War, the Boxer Rebellion, you name it. They were in there picking a fight with the Canadians, the Indians, anybody they could lay their hands on. And it struck me that this community, and they stayed in the community in which they grew up for something like 6 generations. There must have been an endless supply of people from that village who fed these wars continuously. And good heavens, by the time you reach 90, in the worst conflict that you've ever known in military history, you just want to turn up your toes and say it's enough already. So they're ordinary people. Chap here is my namesake, Owen Michael Kinahan, who left Craddock at the age of 20, signed up on his 20th birthday, and within 24 hours of landing in the UK, he was in Rouen and went straight into the trenches. Endless cases of dysentery and trench foot and everything else, wounded twice, and off he went to the Richmond Hospital in the UK, about which I'll say something a little later. The legacy of his war, indifferent health, after only just short of 2 years service, died at the age of 41, leaving a widow and 6 children. So that's how we remember World War I. By far the most exciting of the ancestors to whom I've dedicated it is his father, my great-grandfather, whom I never met. He was a second-generation Cape Town-born Irishman. He signed up at the age of 40, also from Craddock, and his war record chiefly consists of periods of furlough. So he obviously had a very relaxed war, but his excitement is that he happened to be the wrong man at the wrong time in the wrong place on Easter weekend 1916 in Dublin. Dressed in his South African kilt of the Transvaal Irish, and I quote, he was one of 6 kilted South Africans in a motley crew of vacationing colonials who came under fire in O'Connell Street and took refuge in Trinity College. Because he was British Expeditionary Force, he was deployed to man the roof overlooking College Green, and there he was shooting his countrymen in the Sinn Féin rebellion, and the shambolic Sinn Féin rebellion. And I still have a small silver trophy, which is a miniature of the original, presented to the defendants of Trinity College Dublin, which is dedicated to him. So there's something else to remember. This photograph I came across only yesterday. My maternal grandmother, who's the only one of these ancestors that I actually met and really was extremely attached to her. She was a master storyteller. Her mother decided in 1914 that she was going to go home with her family to have the last of her children. And off they sailed. They all came from Gateshead. Off they sailed, and they were stuck in the UK for the duration of the war. and they ended up in a little village called Cullercoats on the coast, which and this is a snapshot of the school group, which I only found yesterday. And her brother, her last brother, who was born there, was 5 years old by the time her passage could be secured back to South Africa in 1919. She had two wonderful tales. She absolutely transfixed me as a youngster with heart-stopping accounts of the ghostly zeppelins floating in from the continent, and to everybody thinks the Blitz was only Second World War, it was First World War, and its first outing actually bombed a school like this in London. And then a thrilling account of her grassing up the neighbours in Cullercoats because they were suspected of flashing signals across the channel to enemy shipping, and she dobbed them in and had them sent off to be detained. So that was an interesting story. So much for the ancestors. What kind of Cape Town are we talking about? This is Cape Town right at the end of the 19th century, and on the brink of events that would change it forever. It's just sort of emerging as a real dorp with a history of long depressions, and De Kivik puts it marvelously how South African history advanced economically by accident and by disaster, I think is the word he uses. So here's Cape Town with a brand new harbour, quite a sophisticated civic centre, and it's trying to box above its weight as an imperial city. It's got all the look of something as prosperous as Birmingham or Sheffield or anything else, which we'll see in a moment. And it is absolutely loyal to the empire, great celebrations for the golden and silver jubilees of Queen Victoria, and an absolute ally for the Anglo-Boer War. So it was a city that was with a new identity. New century, new home. The home was the Burger Wachthuis, 18th century Burger Wachthuis in Green Market Square. I beg your pardon? Who's the lights person?
The story with lights is it's either completely dark or it's lights. So I can turn them off and put us in the dark.
Can we just take a straw poll? Is lights on a problem for people? Yes?
You first check before you vote.
Okay.
Okay, we'll try it for a bit and see. Yes?
Volume a bit up, please.
Volume a bit up.
And volume
Okay.
a bit up is, you've got microphones here, so
Okay.
you need to up your own
All
volume.
right. I will up my own voice. Okay. Thank you. On the left, the Burger Wachthuis, still there on Green Market Square, not highly visible at the moment because it's surrounded by refugees who've spilled out of the Methodist Church on Green Market Square across the road. And the move from the Burger Wachthuis to the brand new City Hall, and on the Grand Parade. This is the dedication of the inauguration of the City Hall, and it was delayed by one war, the Anglo-Boer War, because they simply couldn't get enough building material to finish the Grand City Hall, and of course it was stunted by another war. Lights on or off? On. Okay. The person who can't see that well, do you want to move a little forward? Good try. Okay. It's just quite interesting to read this inaugural appointment, where I say Cape Town is trying to box above its own weight. If you look at the copy there, this was laid by His Worship the Mayor in the 204th 48th year since the appointment of burgher senators and councillors, the 66th year from the constitution of the government ordinance of the municipal board and commissioners, and in the 38th year of the reconstruction by statute of the administration of local affairs. I mean, it's sort of talking itself up as a really ancient city, and it's not at all. And what's even more interesting is the coat of arms there, with the de Mist seal in the middle, Van Riebeck's 3 rings, and the supporters, the red line, and the figure of Spes Bona. There is a huge framed parchment, almost as big as the screen, in the storerooms of the City Council, which is the most abject and elaborate apology I've ever seen, because here was the city trying to sell itself as an ancient and noble capital, and somebody said, but you're not registered with the Bureau of Heralds. To rush through this motion in council, and it's all there on parchment and over the top, but there it is. This is a very beautiful piece of mosaic work which is in the City Hall foyer. The amalgamation of several independent municipalities in Cape Town to form the first Greater Cape Town in 1913. First mayor was John Parker, and this is a plaque which is in the Mowbray Presbyterian Church just down the road. Parker was a very active architect, a very active municipal man. He'd been mayor of the municipality of Mowbray, and he was a staunch Christian in his Methodist faith. This memorial plaque is I say, down the road here, and it's surrounded by the border there, which I don't know if you can see that border. Is typical of Parker's signature in so many of his buildings and his work. And a delight, I'm sure, to that woman in Edinburgh who keeps on asking for independence. It's filled with thistles and saltaires and references to St Andrew and various other things. And here is Parker's scrawl. So he became the first mayor of Greater Cape Town, lasted for 2 years. I see we're missing in 1915, doesn't go backwards. I must emphasize too, this is how the war touched so many people, literally the great and the good in Cape Town. Parker lost his own son, who was missing in action, presumed dead, and then rediscovered in a prisoner of war camp. And all this while you're putting on a brave face in public. And city councillors in those days, I must tell you, really earned their keep, and it was a very, very modest keep. But the record of meetings that they had to attend was quite extraordinary. It would kill the average modern councillor. They met twice a week in full council, had to attend those meetings, had to attend the meetings which they of the committees that they chaired. They were really busy, and as mayor, Parker would have to have attended all of them, like his colleagues, and it amounts up to something like 450 meetings a year, apart from hoisting a flagon or two in the course of the day. I'm really sorry that Harry Hands got up and walked away from me, because he served 3 terms as mayor of Cape Town, Sir Harry Hands. And he really is the most active and incredible mayor of Cape Town. And again, personal tragedy of his own son, Captain Hands, being killed in action. But his daughter was deployed to sing at fundraising concerts, and Harry and Lady Hands were really top-class, active first citizens of Cape Town. The final mayor during the war years was Sir William Thorne, who served right at the end of the war through to 1920, and his at a very difficult time, because that's the 1918 flu epidemic, and he really became a master tactician in organizing the city's response to that. And of course, the lasting legacy is that of his wife, Anna Thorne, who was the inspiration behind the carillon in the City Hall. Just some words about Cape Townians. Cape Town citizenry was unfailingly generous, supporting war relief funds and humanitarian causes. It's quite extraordinary that people in a very modest economy, and this was a dorp, I must emphasize that it was a dorp. Any guesses on the size of the population of Cape Town during the First World War? 180,000. It's minute, more or less evenly split between so-called Europeans and coloured population, and male and female. But that's a very tiny population, and they're not rich, but they put their hands in their pockets often and deeply, and in various causes. These repeated citizens' meetings, and the mayor and council were very good about granting permission to shake tins all over the place. This marvellous fair in the City Hall, sponsored no less by the South African Post Office. Isn't that interesting? Probably can pay its own rent these days. But this fair, and look how jingoistic this is. It's got all sorts of stalls and entertainments, and one of them is called Chasing the Hun. Chase him and punish him, he deserves all you can give. So that was some sort of stall. Another one called the Kaiser's Castle. Visit the vile spot and expend your energy in endeavoring to eliminate its shots. And then there is the shooting gallery. Have a shot at the Kaiser's head and Zeppelins. So, quite apart from the normal flowers and fruit and tombolas and everything else, and they raised extraordinary amounts of money. And a huge number of causes. The Belgian Relief Fund. I mean, those are the people who really gave the prize to the dreaded Hun for being absolutely beastly. And Cape Town shelled out money time and time again for the Belgian Relief Fund, including the construction of a mile of pennies for the Belgians, which all went towards a party on the birthday of King Albert of Belgium. Why couldn't he throw his own party, I asked, but anyway. Then other causes, again, the beastly Hun and the heroic Nurse Edith Cavell, which took Cape Town by storm, and people raised money for a bed in her memory, oversubscribed in 24 hours. But the bed story was something that was taken up with enthusiasm by schools and fundraising groups all over the place. The big shot here includes a picture of my grandfather at Richmond Hospital, the short fellow with the beret on, in Transvaal Scottish, and the picture of the hospital bed. Now, those came in at, I think it was £15 a pop, and schools raised money for them, and it was a matter of great comfort to people who managed to get out of France and be shipped off to Richmond for repair and treatment, that the bed would have a plaque on it. And there would be great competition when you arrived at the hospital to say, I want to be in the bed that Seapoint Boys High gave to the hospital. And a cure factor, something that was greatly prized by the people there. Cape Town had all sorts of setbacks. I mean, this war just came at the wrong time. You're founding a new city in 1913. You want to, all with the exception of Wynberg, all these other municipalities, you're there to address this huge problem, surprise, surprise, lack of water. Nobody could afford to address their own water solution in Cape Town. So the only way to do it was to amalgamate all these municipalities and build a reservoir on the top of Table Mountain. Wynberg said we're okay until they came in much later. But that, you're trying to get a new city off the ground. And you want to talk about things like sewerage and roads and abattoirs and all that sort of thing. And you've got this whole setback because this war comes at an unusual time. Apart from all sorts of things that were delayed, the Sea Point Boys High School that was on the brink of being built, delayed until 1918. The University of Cape Town Act, which was, you know, in the course of being written as parliamentary legislation, delayed until 1918. All sorts of things have just put in the way because of this war that arrived at the wrong time. But some surprising things happened. The beginning of tourism promotion in Cape Town. And it all started, this picture here, of Cape Townians and the Royal Automobile Club sending their private vehicles down to the harbour to pick up Australians and Kiwis on their way through to show them the sights of Cape Town. You recognise the Australians from their little lemon squeezer hats. And that was the beginning of Cape Town tourism, which produced these magnificent publicity posters. They really are quite fantastic. Municipal orchestra thrived. There was a great deal that happened, and Cape Town sort of grinned and bore it. So, first up, we want to fight. Britain says to the Union of South Africa, we actually need all those troops quartered at Wynberg. Can we have them back? And they said, yes, of course. That was a massive impact on Wynberg. The people associated with the military camp at Wynberg were 6,000 people. And those troops were returned to the UK for deployment in the Great War. And South Africa, under the personal leadership of the Prime Minister, General Louis Botha, decided to take on the South West Africa campaign, the German South West Africa campaign. Cartoon of him changing the name. And the first time I've seen this, I don't know whether anybody else has come across it, the imperial flag of German South West Africa. Looks very strange to me. I thought they all just had a Reichsvogel on it, but there it is. Botha returned in triumph from Southwest Africa after a very short campaign, just over a year, I think it was. The large photograph of his motorcade coming up Adderley Street in the bucketing down rain, and all these funny little cars filled to the rafters with cabinet ministers and dignitaries and archdeacons and everybody else who was considered to be important. He was met down Cape Town Pier and ferried up Adderley Street in this downpour and to the City Hall. Huge crowds. I mean, this must have been a great moment. The civic reception, this is the official program. Botha one day, and then a couple of days later, the entertainment of the victorious troops. At the civic reception, Botha was awarded a Sword of Honour by the Corporation of Cape Town. And please, it's one of the reasons I'm giving this lecture, is that I know that there's somebody out there who knows where it is. It was modelled more or less on the Sword of Honour that was given to Lord Roberts at the conclusion of the Anglo-Boer War by by the Corporation of Cape Town. That was quite a fancy affair, covered in diamonds and 18-karat gold and everything else. BOTHA got to have gold and silver and garnets. And it was a combination of sort of pomegranates and bunches of grapes, and a handle with made out of a warthog tusk. So, but it's disappeared. I remember more than 50 years ago seeing the BOTHA collection in the old Pretoria Museum before that burned down, and then what could be saved in that museum eventually went off into storage, and then in the last 15 years or so there have been massive incidences of theft from out of that museum, and I think somebody rather liked the look of the sword and it's gone. So I've got Wilkinson's sword looking for drawings of the thing because they made it, but there's a sort of radio silence at the moment. So what follows Southwest Africa? Why East Africa? That's also German. So again, another cartoon. Germans crossed out and the lion is British, no longer German. And this very simple but dignified plaque, which is in the passage under the cut in the castle, up to the officers of Nenefeld in East Africa. Massive deployment by South Africa. 25,000 troops that went to East Africa. And it holds the record for the largest number of deaths from disease in any theatre of war in the entire First World War. Absolute wipeout. You name it, dysentery, enteric fever, malaria, the lot. And it really is a heartbreaking tale to go through the statistics for that campaign. BOTHA, you remember before the Grand PW Parliament that was redesigned and Star Plain was refurbished, and BOTHA suddenly found himself facing up Rudolph Street instead of down towards the city. That's a picture during construction. And who would have thought that BOTHA would now become the centre of attraction for every protest that takes place on Star Plain? But I'm sure he can take it. We get on to other memorials now. The Carillon in the City Hall is a fascinating story. It was the inspiration of Anna Thorne, as I said, the mayoress of Cape Town, who proposed within days of armistice in November 1918 that there should be a women's peace Thanksgiving memorial in the city of Cape Town. And she decided to pick up the unfinished work of the City Hall. When the City Hall opened in 1905, it was supposed to have 10 bells and the Westminster chimes. When the first quote came in, there was a sharp intake of breath by the councillors and said, "Oh, we can't afford that," and it was hacked right down to 5 bells. So here was the City Hall with only 5 of the 10 bells which it was supposed to have had. It still cost them £520. But the inspiration was to say, well, let's complete the 10, and then we will put in a carillon, which is a collection of bells exceeding 25, which can be rung. You can ring the changes, and you can use it as a musical instrument. So what do we do with all of the other bells? And it's a fascinating tale. There were some bells that were named for individuals. Rhodes had a bell named after him, but it was paid for by the Rhodes Trust. The municipality of Cape Town lost nearly 35 members of staff, including one councillor. And that is the only bill which has all the names inscribed on the bill. And interestingly, I discovered a couple of days ago as well that one of those people employed by the municipality had died in Luderitz, and there he is buried in the Luderitz Municipal Cemetery. Give me Flanders Fields any day of the week. A graveyard in the desert outside Luderitz is not a pretty sight. But that was founded by the Cape Town Municipal Employees Association. Then there were a lot of individual bills. The Cape Town War Memorial Committee, which I'm trying to find out the relationship between the fundraising for the War Memorial, otherwise incorrectly known as the Cenotaph, and the Carillon, because there seems to have been sufficient funding to pay for both. So there's several, most of the other bills are named after particular battles which we know involved Cape Townians. Mayor and Mrs. Thorne gave their own bill. The Victoria League gave its own bill. Ring out the 1,000 years of old and ring in 1,000 years of peace. There is a long description by Dorothea Fabridge, who was the moving spirit of the Victoria League. She waxes quite lyrical. Let us take our thoughts to the centuries to come, through which the bells of Cape Town will keep alive and proclaim to all comers the deep and humble gratitude of her women in this year 1918 towards those knights of God who laid down their lives in this greatest of all crusades. Our sick and our wounded, the lonely and desolate have been cared for. And when they have been passed away, and when we have been passed away, the bells will still remain to cry to all the world our thankfulness. It really is sort of riveting stuff of the period. There is a specific bill to Delville Wood. I'll go into more detail about the Delville Wood Memorial in due course. There is a bill from the women's movement, simply called Gratitude. There is a bill to General Smuts. There's a bill to the Union of South Africa, and then there is a bill to Louis Botha, which bears the inscription, Volg die weg van eer en plicht, follow the path of honor and duty. And that was contained in the speech that he first gave to his troops in 1914, and then in the week of his death. Interestingly, maybe somebody else can tell me about this, Botha apparently never spoke English in a public speech. He only spoke Dutch. I've come across two references to it, but maybe that's maybe it is correct, I don't know. So all these other theatres of war are commemorated. The Egypt campaign, 1916, that was when the troops that had been hardened up through the Southwest Africa campaign, and they were deployed to Egypt to settle the Senussi rebellion, and they were victorious there. The East Africa campaign we're talking about, there is a bill called Damaraland. Although the war in Southwest Africa involved the entire territory, the bill only includes a certain part of the territory for some strange reason. There is a bill for the first Cape Corps in Palestine, where there's particularly heroic action by the Cape Corps, which we'll talk about in a moment. Then various battles. Mario's Wood, this curious description of Mesopotamia. I mean, it sounds so sort of biblical and antediluvian, and yet it appears on the Cape Town War Memorial and on the bells, and it's a sort of a loose term for Near and Middle East. It's the remnants of the Ottoman Empire and all the stuff that we're still living with in Iran and Iraq today. Battle of Le Cateau, Menin Road, which is a ghastly story. I'll talk about that in a moment as well. Ypres, Armentières, Sorel-le-Grand, Amiens, Passchendaele, Messens Ridge, Arras, Waldencourt, Longueval, and Beaurevoir. That's 37 bells altogether. 2 smaller bells were added in 1953. They are unnamed. I've known about this for some time, but I kept absolutely dead quiet about it, in case Patricia DeLille named them after Michelle Obama. There is a movement, and I've planted the seed, that those bells should be reserved for remembering the Mendi, because although there's an extensive Mendi memorial, which I'll also cover just now, there is nothing which the city itself records the Mendi. And secondly, the 1918 flu epidemic, which is a massive impact on Cape Town. And there's no public monument to the victims of the 1918 flu. So that is the carillon. It was officially opened by the Prince of Wales on the 30th of April 1925 on his royal visit to Cape Town. Here he is in procession, fresh off the boat, off the Repulse, and only just got his land legs, being escorted by Mayor Verster and the city's mace bearer, and for the inauguration. Anton Brias, I think his name is Brias, was imported for the occasion. He was the #1 carillonneur in the world at the time, to have these concerts. And Cape Town just revelled in this latest municipal toy. I mean, the poor Prince of Wales had to sit through 3 concerts, which rang out all these patriotic tunes of God Save the King, God Bless the Prince of Wales, all those things. But 3 times. Anyway, we hope that that's going to come back to us one of these days. There's also a very large memorial in the foyer and the grand staircase of the City Hall to the Cape Corps. It is the largest memorial of listed names in the city of Cape Town. It's absolutely tragic because of you see in Technicolor the impact of the flu epidemic there. There is another memorial, which is this buxom lass on the right here, mysteriously known as Mrs. Murphy. Is a mascot statue apparently owned by the Cape Corps. Nobody knows anything about her. Kevin and I have been like Conan Doyle trying to find out anything about it. Nobody knows a thing. She's obviously inspired by Spesbona, the Lady of Good Hope, with the anchor. She probably needed the anchor. She's got the largest feet of any woman I've ever seen. And it is a huge, very ungainly sculpture. It's planted in the castle. It shouldn't be there. And the idea was to try and move it to the memorial precinct in the company's garden. But without a provenance, it's scrap metal. It would be keeping company with distinguished designers and sculptors like Van Vaux, who did the Lucan statue, and the Baker and Massey Delver Wood statue. Please, anybody who knows anything about Mrs. Murphy, let us know. This is just to pick up the eloquence of a straightforward form for burials in the Kimberley cemetery. The Cape Corps was quartered between Cape Town and Kimberley. Many of them were already infected with the Spanish flu when they left Europe. And when they got to Cape Town, the authorities said, well, we'll quarantine you, which they did for 2 days. And then they were shipped off to Kimberley. And you can literally follow it up the railway line. And Howard Phillips has written a masterful work on this, which he's been busy with for many years. You can literally follow the deaths up the line from Cape Town to Kimberley, which then meet the migrant labour coming out of Kimberley down the line. And in going through the database that I'm working on simultaneously with this, I know that I don't even have to go anywhere else when I see a date of October 1918. And this is a small example of there are 10 people here who buried on the same day, sharing graves in Kimberley. There are many other instances where there are many more than that of people dying from the flu. Cape Town lost in the region of 20,000 people. Bodies on the streets.